She has been a longtime member of OLOC, and she was partners with one of the early founders of OLOC. So she knows a lot about what's going on with the organization over a longer period of time than many of us who are on today's event. She will give us an overview, herstory of OLOC, and she also has recently published a book that's called Coming Out: Emergence of the Movement Lesbian. So we want to welcome Sharon.
Hi, everybody. Oh, wait a minute, my hand is in the way. Okay. Can you see me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah. And hear me. You can hear me. Okay.
Yeah.
My window. Oh, first of all, I have to make a correction. My lover, who died 5 years ago, was not an original founder of OLOC. My window into OLOC started before OLOC ever existed. I was involved because I am a gerontologist and a sociologist, and started writing articles about old lesbians. I started meeting different people, and one way I met one of the founding members, or who later became a founding member, was through a thesis that my deceased spouse wrote, the first thesis ever written about old lesbians. Now, she didn't have the consciousness we have today, so she called it the older lesbian, which is a no-no, but it was written in 1979, and it was the first thesis published anywhere in the world on old lesbians. And in the process of doing her work, she interviewed 20 participants, and one of them was Betty Shoemaker, who later became one of the, in the first group of the early steering committee. I couldn't think of the first steering committee. And what happened was, as we were getting together, I was getting together with Barbara McDonald, you know that name, who wrote Look Me in the Eye, with her partner, Cynthia Rich. Look Me in the Eye, Old Women, Aging and Ageism. I was talking to her, and she and her partner, Cynthia, we became friends. And we talked a lot about the future of old lesbians. And then she wrote the book. At some point, she wrote and published the book. Also, there was another important book written by Baba Copper called Over the Hill: Reflections on Ageism Between Women. And those two books together were very powerful because they concentrated on the experiences that old lesbians were having in the community, in our community, in the lesbian community, and the little wider community, and it feeling left out, feeling invisible as they were getting old. And so this was written, once something is published, it has an effect. So at some point, there were a number of meetings that went on in Southern California. There were some in Northern California too, but I'll get to that later. There was a group, not too many of them are alive left, but who claimed that they started OLOC. Old Lesbian Organizing Committee was first started in San Francisco, but that's not really the case. But they are a very important group, and I think very pioneering. The chapter that is in San Francisco had a great influence on the direction and the ideas and the forward thinking of OLOC. But back to Southern California in, what year was it? In 1987, we had well, we didn't call it a gathering, we called it a conference for and by old lesbians, the West Coast Conference for and by old lesbians. But people came, lesbians came from all over the world. Actually, there were a few from other countries, but a lot from the East Coast, the Midwest, and of course, many from the Northwest, and many from my part of the state of California, and San Francisco, of course. And there were maybe 300 women there, I think, 200 to 300 women. And it was a lovely time. And we had two keynote speakers, Barbara McDonald, who wrote the book, Look Me in the Eye, and was doing a lot of lectures on fighting ageism to various academic groups. And now she was speaking to us, to her own kind. And Chevy Healy, who later became the head of the steering committee. And they gave very powerful addresses. A lot of movers and shakers were there. There was a woman named Charlotte Ellis, who was the oldest living lesbian that we knew at the time. She was in her 90s. She was a Black woman in a wheelchair who had a lot to do with the New York archives. Actually, I think she was the founding person for the archives, as far as I know. And it was, she was there. And who else was there was Edie Windsor. Now, I didn't know she was going to become the famous Edie Windsor, who helped us get our marriage equality. But not too long ago, she wrote to Susan Weishart and sent her the T-shirt she had worn at our 87 conference. Well, anyway, it was a great conference, and it started things going, and we did so much, and there was great art. We displayed our art. We read poetry. There were plays. There was a little solo performance type plays. And, lesbians are very creative women, and we enjoyed it. And then 2 years later in '89, there was another conference that I was allowed to attend. I don't know exactly how I got in there because I was only in my 40s, but Mina and I were there. And I remember Chevy was there, and everyone was there that was, part of the original group. And and I wasn't really that aware of it, but a group of them got together at lunch and decided to start Old Lesbians Organizing Committee, which later became Old Lesbians Organizing for Change. And we were the first organization, as far as I can tell, who claimed the word old. And Gray Panthers existed before us, and they did use the word old and young together, fighting in coalition for a better world. But they didn't claim the word old and turn it from, ugly, decrepit words like that, over the hill, using synonyms all the time. Euphemisms, I mean. Instead of that, we were trying to do something bigger, larger, taking control of our future. And that we were very critical. I don't know how we really got into it with Mina, because how we we were asked to participate and to host certain things, but we weren't of age. And there was certainly a lot of talk in the early days about how young people, well, we were middle-aged people, were trying to take over old lesbians, and how bad that was. And we understood why they were doing that, but we were to be honest with you, the enemy. And because we were, young, and there was Barbara in her work had a lot of concern and I kind of agreed with her about the future of old lesbians. We had, in terms of being concerned that younger people, even middle-aged people, might exploit old lesbians for their own purposes, especially bureaucrats. And I'm a gerontologist, so we weren't that well liked. But somehow I convinced Barbara that I was, we and Mina and I were on her side. But I was looking up the dates and I realized that I didn't really join OLOC. I wasn't old enough, and I didn't really join until I was 63 in 2004. But I feel like I've been a member of OLOC forever because I've been following OLOC and writing articles about OLOC. And our main mission has been fighting ageism as it affects old lesbians. And I was asked maybe to talk a little bit about how things have changed. Our mission hasn't really changed, except I think it's broadened away from focusing on the gay community and the lesbian community and ageism, because OLOC did such a good job of going out into the communities, going to the organizational conventions and conferences and making old lesbians so visible in their groups that they had to change and stop, looking at us as invisible or feeling like what we had to say wasn't relevant. That did begin to change, although now with the queer movement, I'm not sure. I think we're, going back to that in a way because of the disappearance of the L word, as Bonnie has described it. But I think our focus hasn't changed so much, but I think that we don't, although we say we're fighting ageism, I think we focus so much on the other isms that sometimes, and not to say that we shouldn't, but we focus so much that we don't do enough on talk. For instance, we don't talk about this mess with the nursing homes. Look at all these deaths that have happened recently in the nursing home business. Of course, lesbians don't really like to go to nursing homes unless they, absolutely have to. And gay people in general have rejected the idea of being part of that nursing home bureaucracy, but we end up there anyway. And we've done
Time check.
yeah, and we've
Time
done a
check.
pretty good job. 1 minute.
Yep.
So yeah, so I think OLOC has made a great difference for old lesbians. We've helped us find community. Ruth Deborah invented this great saying, old lesbian pride, that I really believe was a great contribution to our thinking and to the ideas of OLOC. And sometimes we get mixed up about we have an educational purpose. We're not social workers. Sometimes we get confused about that. So my sense is we do need to work a little bit more on figuring out some of the way San Francisco figured their schemes out about really working on aging and old age and what that really means for us and how we can make it better. But we've done a great job in most areas, I think. And I hope we keep doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. That was a good way to get us started off. People are clapping and waving.
Oh,
so
I wanted to
just say,
can I say one other thing?
Sure.
I'm giving all my stuff to the Mazer Archives, which is in Los Angeles. And I just don't want them to be forgotten, because they've been around a long time and they're associated with UCLA. So I just wanted to plug them.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Just for those who have been asking, we have created a resource list, and I will post that link later on into the chat that will list all these different archives that some of the lesbians are presenting in this presentation today. So we're going to now go to Deb Edel. She co-founded the Lesbian Herstory Archives in New York, with Joan Nessel and several others back in 1974. That would be Deb, and the archives have both been going strong since then. So welcome, Deb. If you want to unmute yourself and chat with us, that'd be great.
Thank
I'll
you.
give you a 9-minute head up.
Sounds good. Thank you. And hi, everybody. It's wonderful to see faces of women I know and faces of people who have actually come to the archives. What I want to talk about today very briefly is a little bit about the history of the archives and how we got going. And then, well, you'll see as I try to organize my thoughts. The archives started in 1974. We were a group of women at that point who were feeling very much that our history had disappeared and was disappearing as quickly as we could find it, as quickly as we could make it, as quickly as we were living it. And so we decided to put our materials and our lives together and form an archives to preserve, to collect, to gather, and to share the material. We did that in part because we all knew what it was like to try to find our history. This was 1974. It was hard to find information on our lives. We did it because we in the most general and broad and inclusive sense, we were all very concerned that we did not want others to define for us our history. In the mainstream, in the libraries, in archives that existed, mostly run by straight people, we didn't want them to say what a lesbian was. We didn't want them to say who we were. We wanted to have some control over our history. And that was very important to us. We also wanted to create a space that was different from most of the libraries and archives that existed, because we wanted it to be a space where people felt comfortable, where lesbians who had never been to an archives, who'd never gone to college, who'd always been out in the working world, could feel as comfortable as a PhD candidate who had been working in archives their whole lives. And so it was very important to us that we create a space where anybody who walked in the door could have a cup of tea, which was against the rules in most archives, didn't have to hide everything, could actually have their backpacks in the public space, could actually touch materials. And that was vital to us. And that's one of the things I worry about with all the digitization that is going on today, which is very important to share information. But there is something so profoundly moving about being able to physically touch a document, even if it's in plastic, preserved, but to physically hold in your hand something that had been created by a lesbian in a generation before. And that was why we started the archives, and that was the archives, what the archives was about. As we progressed, we were able in 1991, and our, old age, sometimes memory it changes as we look back, but it was 1991, we purchased a building, and thanks to the communities around the world, we were able to pay off the mortgage within a few years after we bought the building. So the Lesbian Herstory Archives owns its own building in Brooklyn and Park Slope, New York City. It's not connected with a university. It's not connected with any other organization. It's not under the auspices of any other organization. It is a freestanding building and a freestanding archives all by itself. We often say, where and how do we find our information? And I think that's important to know, because prior to the archives and the archiving movement that's gone on in this country, and prior to not just Stonewall, but all the other activities that were going on in California and Philadelphia and around the world, we could find lesbian history in prison records. We could find lesbian history in psychological texts. When I give a tour of the archives to people, I like to show them a book that was created, written by a committee in 1947 and 48. It's called the Committee for the Study of, I don't remember the exact title, and I'm no place near the archives right now. But basically it was about sex variance. And what they were setting out to do was to measure, and they thought they were being positive about it. They were setting out to measure clitorises and breasts and anatomy to see if there was a difference in people between lesbians, bisexuals, and other peoples that way. And so if they did not just the measurements of body types, but they collected oral histories. And in the transcriptions, if you can read through the language that was being used, if you can read through the material that was being presented, you can find incredible histories of women, of lesbians, of bisexuals, of transgender people, of trans people, all of whom were looked at in this odd way. And that's where our history lies. Our history lies in so many different buried places. And so it's very important when you're thinking about lesbian history that you remember that we are the history for the next generation, and they are the history for the generation after them. And so it's very important that we look to everybody, not in a narrow, exclusive way, but in a broad, inclusive way to include the broadest community of who we are, so that future generations can have lots of material to find out about who we are and what we're about. And so my plea, which will be my plea throughout this, is that don't just turn to your friend and say, you know, you lead a fascinating life. Why don't you collect your history? But look to yourself and say, how do I want to be remembered in the future? How do I want the next generation to remember me? How do I want to be memorialized for the future? Gather your material. It doesn't have to be formally written. You don't have to be a writer. You don't have to be published. You don't have to be an expert. But think about yourself, what it is, because only you can be defining who you are, how you want to be remembered, and send it to some archives. We never say we're the place to send material. You may want to send it to a local community. You might want to save it and share it in a number of different places. You might want to send us photocopies. Doesn't matter. Don't lose your history just because you don't think you're important. You are vitally important. We are vitally important. Now, it's also important to remember there, just to switch top, one last thing though, before we, you know, I'm also concerned about time, but so there are two directions I want to take. One is I will share with you now, and then the other one might be part of my final closing speech. We also have found ourselves not just in history books, not just in mental health records, not just in prison records, not just in song from the past where lesbian code was encoded, either clearly or not clearly, but we also find ourselves in the trash. And what I meant by that, and I'm going to share with you, and some of you have heard this, is that early in the start of the archives, a friend of ours knew that we needed file folders. That was before we had some money to buy file folders. And he was walking down the street and he saw in the garbage on the street a box. And in that box, lots and lots of file folders. So he schlepped the box home, to use a good New York Jewish term. He schlepped the box home and he started to call us, and he said, come on down and let's clean out throw things away. And back in, it was easy. You flip the file folder, you cross out whatever this person had on it. And we have endless file folders then, which would help us develop the collection.
Time check, Deb.
Time check. Oh my God, I won't be able to read you. Okay. Anyhow, as we went through we realized as we went through the material, we realized the folders were less important than the material that was in it. And what we had discovered was a lesbian woman who had given her more formal papers to the Sophia Smith collection, but whose letters, incredible love letters, were still in the garbage on the street, about to be thrown out. And so we can make sure now in archives that we do not lose our history, that it doesn't become trash, but that we do something with the material. And again, my plea first is take your own personal life seriously. And my second plea is please, please think inclusively. There was a time when butches and femmes felt pushed out in the 70s, felt their history was being pushed out of the lesbian community. The sex wars in the 80s, lesbians who were involved in S&M felt pushed out of the lesbian community. It's too easy for us to not be inclusive, to think about communities rather than community, and to hurt and exclude people. So my plea to all of us is think inclusively so that the future will have a commitment to understanding what we were about rather than a narrow vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deb. Really appreciate your words. And I like that we have to remember ourselves as part of our herstories, as well as we think of others. So our next speaker is Krü Maekdo. She's new to the lesbian landscape of archiving. She started the Black Lesbian Archives in 2010 to bring awareness, to build community, to educate and preserve Black lesbian culture while bridging intergenerational gaps. So I'd like to welcome Krü.
What's up, y'all? That's actually 2017. I would love to put the 2010 on there, but that's when I graduated.
My bad. I'm so sorry. It says it right here too, 2017.
No, it's all good. It's all good. But yeah, no, I appreciate you, Mev, for actually putting this together. Lisa Lotus too, I know you in the chat too, kind of bridging those gaps and things like that. And everybody who's in the chat that I know, what's up? So yeah, Black Lesbian Archives was basically started in 2017 in Williamsburg, Virginia. At the time, I was staying with my auntie after leaving Atlanta, after I moved to Atlanta from Texas at the time. I had a spiritual awakening in Texas, and it kind of fumbled down into when I got to Virginia and actually wanted to start something different. First, it was Queer Black Creatives, which I started first. That was the first thing that I started. But then I wanted to get a little bit more specific after seeing this documentary. Like I had already, like I tell people all the time, I was watching all these different lesbian web series, and I was like, there gotta be more. It gotta be more. There's gotta be some more information out there to really look into. So I stumbled across this documentary called The Last Lesbian Bars Left in America or something like that on Broadly. It was on YouTube, but it's through Broadly. And it just talked about like all these spaces that were closing down just around the world. And I was like, well, for me at the time I was coming up, I'm a 92 baby. So like bookstores was closing, you know what I'm saying? Bookstores was kind of closing around. So we couldn't necessarily go to the bookstores like that, but we still had bars that we could go to meet other lesbians or other people in the community. And so once I saw that documentary, and I'm like, dang, well, if the lesbian bars is closing, you know, around the world, then where are we going to be able to meet? Like, where are we going to be able to actually commune and get together? So I was like, okay, we got to do something. So I just automatically, same day after I saw that, I started the Instagram, I started the Facebook, I started the website. I just put everything up because something was just telling me, you just need to get it cracking. Let's get to it. And basically from there, it was like a journey of something that started from curiosity to literally blowing up in my face, you know what I mean, into this whole archival project. So after I left Williamsburg, Virginia, I ended up going to Chicago. In Chicago, I met Tracy Bain, which is actually one of the co-founders of Windy City Times and now is the editor for the Chicago Reader. She actually introduced me to Imani, which at the time was the director at Affinity Community Services, but which is now the director at NCLR, the National Center for Lesbian Rights out in California. But we actually put that together. What really sparked it was after seeing this exhibit called The Dyke Spaces of the 70s and 80s, or the 60s, I think it was the 70s and 80s, that Kristen Kaza and Ruby Western did. And I met Tracy like as I'm pulling up, you know what I mean? As I'm pulling up to the exhibit, Tracy was coming out and I was like, yo, Tracy. So we walked in, she was introducing me to people. That's when I met Pat McCombs, for those of you that know Pat, and some of the other panelists that were there. I mean, I've never seen a lesbian exhibit ever. That was my first time walking into an exhibit. That's the first time I saw like the Lavender, not Lavender Menace, the Lavender publication. It was just so many off our back, like on our backs or off our backs, one of those. I was just blown away, like the material that was there. And I was like, I didn't even know this existed. Black lines, like all of that. And so from there, I was like, this is dope, but I would definitely like to see more representation of Black lesbians, because I knew doing research in Chicago that there was a lot of lesbians that were Black lesbians specifically that were a lot on the front lines of these movements. So after that, like I said, that was like the inspiration for that. I talked to Tracy about what I wanted to do. She kind of expanded that vision when I went to go talk to Imani. I told Imani what it is that I was trying to do. I was going to make the Black Lesbian Archives, actually the Black Queer Archives is the first thing that I was gonna, well, not the first thing that I was gonna do, but I was in between, because like Deb said, when we was talking about like inclusion and things like that, I was like, I mean, I want to include, you know, but then at the same time, I was like, this is very specific. So Imani was like, well, Krü, what is it that you're trying to do? You know, what is it that you're trying to like, what is it that you're trying to create? And so when I told her again, like, I mean, this is specifically for lesbians, I just kept it as the Black Lesbian Archives, because I was like, this is for us, you know what I mean? So went in from there. It was like an 8-month process. I started talking to some of the women in the community, setting this whole thing up. And then we ended up having the exhibit. It was only going to be for a week, but shout out to Imani for making it a month, because I was like, we could just do it for a week. She was like, it's Pride, make it a month. So I was like, all right, month, let's do it. So we did a opening with Yvonne Wellman, who is also the director at Sisters in Cinema and the creator of Sisters in Cinema. So we did an opening with her book that dropped. It was Sisters in the Life, African-American Lesbian Media Making. She's also the producer of Ruth Ellis at 100 too, as well. So we did that. We had a BLA confessional room where you could go in and, you know, you can either, you know, speak from the heart. You had like 2 to 5 minutes to kick it, or you had like a little prompt that you can go off of and talk about your story. On the other side, we had a film screening room where you can actually go to chicagogayhistory.org, and there's all these all this information about, you know, different lesbians, everybody in the community really, but we had Bernita Gray, shout out to Bernita Gray. Bernita Gray on screen, telling her story in Chicago and things like that. I'm also going to do a project on Bernita Gray. I just want to put that out there into the ether so y'all can hold me accountable for that, because I love me some Bernita Gray. That's bae. But moving on, basically did that, and then it kind of spurred into the next year. We would partner with Gerber Hart and did an opening reception with that. We did we went back and forth with Artemis Singers, doing events with Artemis Singers as well. Shout out to Artemis, because y'all definitely held me down, for sure. And then we ended up doing that next year, a 9-day tour stop. So Deb, we was actually able to come visit at the Lesbian Herstory Archives. I actually took a tour at the Lesbian Herstory Archives for that. We did Philly, DC, and New York. So it's kind of just trickled all down to this now. Now currently we are getting ready to undergo a school bus conversion called the BLA Mobile Herstory Bus, where we're going to actually be doing a Kickstarter fundraiser on March. It's going to go down from March 28th through April 27th, where we're going to be kickstarting and raising $15,000. If y'all will know somebody who would be able to donate a bus, please let me know. But some of those funds is going to go into the bus itself, and also the conversion as well, to build it out, be able to create a space where we can actually travel when we do go on tour in 2022 and 2023, because we're going to break it up this time. We're not going to try to travel all around the world in 1 year or in 6 months. So we're going to break it up and do a 6-month tour from Atlanta, Georgia to California. And then in 2023, that's 2022. And in 2023, we're going to do from California, go all across. So like a southeast mid tour. So we'll go across Southwest, and then we'll do Southeast mid, whatever we call it. And then go back across, go up through New York, come back down Ohio, and end in Chicago. So that will be that. We'll be doing storytelling on that bus. We'll be doing podcasting on that bus. People who want to perform will have a marketplace. So if people want to come and set up their things and, you know, talk and speak and play drums, music, all that kind of stuff off this bus. It'll be a community bus. So even after we're done using that bus for the tour, other people are able to use that bus. So yeah, and also too, I don't know if it's going to be necessarily, somebody mentioned this actually when I went on Affinity last week for the chats, to actually set something up for the kids to do like start an internship program for the kids for them to be able to build out the bus in Chicago. But if y'all have any, I would definitely love to do the project with kids involved, especially since in Chicago, there's a lot of seasonal depression because, you know, you have to go through long winters and stuff like that. So I would love to have that project open and available for kids who are able to kind of come in and do that. But we are looking for land. You know, I did mention this with Milk as well. And shout out to Milk too for having me on the other week. But if there's land that y'all could find to be able to build out the bus, please let me know about that. I will be asking for tools. So if anybody has tools available to like really build out the bus, please let me know. And yeah, that's a little bit about that. More information on that link, BLA or blacklesbianarchives.wix.com/info/HerStoryBus. You can actually see the presentation about the bus, like what we're planning to do with the bus, and then the link above it is the Kickstarter campaign. So if you get your get in for that, you know what I mean, you'll be able to get notified when we actually kick off the campaign and stuff like that. But
I'm check.
Okay, all right, so quickly so I want to go back to what Deb said, and then I'll kind of close it off. And if y'all want to talk more, you can email me at blacklesbianarchives@gmail.com. Physical archives, I get the whole digital and digitizing thing. Trust me, I get it. Information being able to be out, the fact that we're able to meet like this is great. But physical archives, the fact that we can still pull up newsletters, the fact that we can still pull up publications and stuff and read out of them, there's something so intimate about that. So I want y'all to understand that I'm hearing so much talk in the community right now. It's like, why don't we just digitize everything? And I'm like, yes, but no. Okay, we need physical archives so we're able to distribute, so we're able to pass down, so you're able to actually sit with it. In a digital civilization that we live in, everybody's so quick to scroll, and the information does not sit with you the way a physical archive will be able to sit with you. So I just want to say that future forward, we will have buildings, we will have actual, okay. Just hit me up. Thank y'all for giving me the opportunity. I definitely want to come through and talk for y'all, or talk more with y'all about everything going on, but definitely keep up. Thank you very much. Love y'all. Peace. This is.
Oh, thank you very much, Krü. And I could tell from the chat that everybody's like energized by your energy. So we so appreciate you being able to join us today and to share your work with us. And in the chat, we did put the Ache Project virtual exhibit. So the link for that is in the chat. So go for that. And I have been seeing some questions about, is this being recorded? The answer is yes. So it will be available in a week or so. And we will also put the chat up there too, because there's some informational comments in there as well. So we'll make sure the chat gets up as well. So you're welcome. What?
No, okay, yes, the Ache Project is going on. It started February 20th and it ends March 28th. I just want to put that out there because I did not mention that. We are in a full exhibit right now. We're having a takeover with the Leslie Lowman Museum this week. So stay tuned. Okay, I'm done.
All right. Thank you very much, Krü. So some of you may recognize Bonnie Morris as the author of Eden Built by Eves, The Culture of Women's Music Festivals, and The Disappearing L, Erasure of Lesbian Spaces and Culture, which is kind of the inspiration for the title of today's event. Currently, she is working on archiving the artifacts of the Olivia records. So welcome, Bonnie.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Well, most of you know me. I'm kind of the promiscuous archivist. I'm involved in a little bit of everything. I actually started as a pretty little kid, saving things, scrapbooking, keeping a journal from age 12 on. Then I went on to get a doctorate in women's history at one of the only places at the time that you could do a PhD in women's history, and that was Binghamton in upstate New York. Which happened to have 5 lesbian bars and a membership club called Horizon, with other grad students who were similarly interested in documenting what was going on with lesbian culture in our own time. And probably the most instrumental choice I made in my 20s was to buy a battery-powered tape recorder and begin taping events, speeches, and announcements at women's music festivals. So I'm fairly well known for having devoted my 20s, 30s, and 40s to documenting festival culture. And at a critical point, I met Tony Armstrong Jr. and began writing for Hotwire and gained a good bit of skill from her mentoring. Both in terms of editing what I wrote, writing more journalistically for a reading audience that might not be academic, and also what the meaning of production values, technical skill, all of the backstage part of festival culture that if you're only an audience, you may not gain expertise to address. And I embedded myself in nearly every role in festival culture so I could get close to different women in staff positions and either interview them or have more of authentic commentary on their contribution. I'm now in a position where I was invited after moving to California in 2017. I became the archivist for Olivia Records, and I can tell you that there are fantastic original materials in that warehouse in San Francisco, beyond my wildest dreams. And speaking of physical intimacy, of touching actual objects passed down generation to generation, my first assignment there was to get all the old Masters tapes by Chris Williamson out of broken bankers' boxes under a leaking pipe and onto shelves, so that I was handling our culture and storing it carefully. And nobody could have taken greater pleasure in doing that kind of cleanup. But while I was cleaning up, I found a lot of things that I think would resonate with many of you. The original scores for Meg and Chris at Carnegie Hall, Olivia's 10th anniversary. Letters between Kay Gardner and Meg Christian about the recording of Meg's guitar background for Kay on Moon Circles. Letters between Meg Christian and Therese Edel about how Therese should move forward in her career. Meg writing to the Library of Congress, how do I register a song? So I've made many, many lists and notations and organized the entire inventory of what's still left at Olivia in terms of original 45 singles and vinyl. And I'm now getting emails all week, every week, from lesbians all over the world who are aging and considering, what should I do with my stuff? So that's my connection today. What do we do with our stuff? The first thing I want to mention that I've learned from getting so many poignant letters from women I don't know. Many women are at the point of losing a partner and in the grieving process, having to go through that partner's stuff. And it has a very sacred aspect. Some women want to just get it out of the house, garage, attic, bedroom, because it's so painful. Others have a strong respect for their partner's collection. Where should it go? Those are both very important aspects of letting go. The other thing is there's a sense of outrage that not everybody's stuff is going to end up in a museum, because aren't we important? We sure are. But here's the problem. Everybody came out at once and everybody bought a copy of Ruby Fruit Jungle, and there just aren't enough museums for the millions of copies of Ruby Fruit Jungle that were sold, if you get my meaning. So there's an excess of stuff simply because the desire to own everything that had the word lesbian on it meant that the same material ended up in a lot of women's homes. And a lot of us are having to make the decision to just accept we pass on some books or albums personally as gifts to friends, and then others that are more rare might go to a museum or to an installation or an exhibit. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. So there's duplication, and then we have choices. It is great that there is more than one museum. Partly in the same way it was great that there were festivals in different parts of the country. Not everybody can get to something distant. We're very skittish about air travel for good reason now, but there's also women who aren't necessarily going to drive across country or want to go that far from home for any number of reasons. It's great to have a critical museum, the June Mazer Archives in LA, and the Lesbian Herstory Archives in Brooklyn, and then the Schlesinger Library in Cambridge, where my stuff's going to go, the Sophia Smith Archives in Western Massachusetts. Then there's Lori Fuchs' Lady Slipper Papers at Duke, and now the stunning Michigan State University Archives with the Michigan festivals of Hot Wire and Goldenrod and more. And there's quite a few others. There's also a gay and lesbian archive in San Francisco and smaller regional collections too. And thus, what I've been advising the many women who write to me is you can make a choice that's personal to you. It might be in connection with your local activism, where you lived at the time, and what it has resonance for your life. In my case, I was approached really early by the Radcliffe Institute that very much wanted my festival interviews and recordings and papers. And because I had taught at Harvard and actually had a really hot affair on the very block where the Schlesinger is located, I went with that for the entire combination of my life. They wanted my documents. I had taught there. It's a university. I was a professor. I'd had a wonderful relationship in the community, blah, blah. It will be very different for other people. The next thing that I learned working with women who do oral history in the Santa Cruz community and are also librarians is that you have to be aware when you donate material, it won't automatically end up in an exhibit because it goes to what's called the back of the queue at a university archive or a museum like the Smithsonian. Beware of mold. Museums do not want your moldy stuff. It will be quarantined. We're all learning about that. And so have a sense of what you have that is clean and ready to go versus what might be just not in the kind of shape that could get into a critical installation that might be coming up soon and tangential to what you have. Along these lines, I'm delirious to say that I am now a scholarly advisor to the National Women's History Museum we're trying to build in Washington, D.C. I am keenly aware that in 2023, Olivia will celebrate her 50th anniversary. And I have been working really hard to try to set up Olivia exhibits in the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, and to make the as yet unbuilt Women's History Museum in DC aware that I have many duplicate albums and wonderful Olivia materials that I can donate to them. There's also something pleasurable I can share, which is that the New York City public school system instituted something called the Hidden Voices Project, which is a curriculum on lesbian and gay figures in American history. And I was able to write the entry on Edie Windsor, and that's being sent to every public school in New York this fall. So I'm active on all these fronts, and I'm available to all of you through my website and my email to answer further questions. The last thing I'll say is that it's important to save your journals and not throw them out. Keep those diaries for the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. And I'm glad that you answered a lot of the questions that I know were in the questions that some of the lesbians had sent ahead of this event. So for many of you who I hope were paying attention and got the answers to your questions. I would like next now to introduce Alí Marrero-Calderón. Alí is one of the original Dykes on Bikes in San Francisco in 1976. And not only is she a busy member of the OLOC steering committee, but she's also actively working to organize old lesbians in Puerto Rico. She currently lives in Bayamón, Puerto Rico, and would love to see more old Latina Caribeña lesbians involved with OLOC. Welcome, Alí.
Hola, hi, Alí Marrero-Calderón. I'm 72 years old, born in 1948. I live in Bayamón, Puerto Rico, and I also live in Combate, Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico, which is the southwest part of the island, the most southern and western point of the island. I appreciate being here today, and I appreciate everything that everybody has said. It would be great for me to think, ooh, a Caribeña lesbian archive. How great would that be? Right now, I'm trying to deal with the word lesbian here on the island. There are a lot of us. That being said, we're also very not connected as a community. There are some of us that are in community. I've shared a lot about OLOC to old lesbians here on the island. I've had many meetings with different groups from different parts of the islands, from the metro area, which is, I want to say that here in Puerto Rico, and I've only been here like a year and a few months, but this is where I was born. These are my roots. This is where I came back to. I've lived in California for 55 years, and my herstory is more dealing in the Bay Area and working at Mishfest and doing festivals and that part of it. My activism has been mostly in California, Michigan, the South. One of the things that's really hard here is that there are a lot of, they don't like to be called closeted, because when there's an LGBTQAI plus something happening, everybody shows up. And everybody, and I mean, old lesbians, we're talking about old lesbians who are closeted still because of the old fear about what it means to be out as a woman, as a dyke. Our young lesbian community are more conscious and more active in hitting the streets and doing what's politically, you know, at this point in our lives. So I wanted to do this. I attended the March 8th. I posted on Facebook all the music, all the women, the men, the trans, everybody that came out to support International Women's Day. But I only saw a few of what I call my constituents, who are old lesbians, older lesbians. The one person that I saw who is an old Afro-Caribeña lesbian, she's our senator. This year, she was put in our Senate here in Puerto Rico. And she is a great big advocate for lesbians and the LGBTQ plus community. To get her is really important for me. I mean, she's a personal friend as well, but it's still hard. It's hard to get lesbians here to commit to something like being old. It's a word that they don't like to use here. And I've had like maybe 5 meetings with different little groups. So little Herstory, my mom passed in February of last year, not of COVID. And, you know, I inherited some money that I've never had in my life. And I bought a property. It's called Las Amazonas, the Amazons. And it's an intentional community for old lesbians. And in that process, I've been inviting lesbians. Here we're looking at 55 and older. A lot of women consider themselves at an age where they can they're no longer are, vamos a decir, I mean, let's say, they no longer consider themselves young. And they are lesbians. And I've had the pleasure of having many meetings at Las Amazonas, which is going to become our center for lesbians to come and do workshops and do readings and do music and do bomba and do spoken word. We don't have that here. We do have lesbians who are, oh my God, they're so, excuse me, oh my goddess, they are so amazingly brilliant women. Most of them are professional. All of them are activists. Not all of them are on the same page where we want to go as old lesbians, as we're aging. So one of the things that I'm doing here is having these many meetings to see if we can get a group from this different parts of the island to meet and be part of this. Their big concern is OLOC is 501c3 from the United States. They have no money. The economics here are horrible. I mean, it's cheap to live here. It's cheap to live here. That's not the issue. But the government here is not existent. Kind of like the government in the US, but we're a protectorate of the US. We're US citizens. And most of these lesbians, old and young, really don't want anything to do with US. You know, that's the reality that I'm working with here. And so I get a lot of questions. What can OLOC do for me here on the island from there in the US? What, you know, so we're building a needs assessment here to see if we can at least get organized as old lesbians. But in order to do that, we need lesbians who claim their age, who claim their oldness. And it's the hardest thing here, the hardest thing, because old is invisible. Lesbian is invisible. That's why you see so many women working towards women's rights and not just lesbian rights. There were Sage, I think Sage and Waves Ahead here on the island were giving funds to do lesbian programming and nobody shows up. Even in like doing something like this in Zoom, we have an old lesbian, Maria Sanchez, who's does music therapy on Zoom for Sage and Waves Ahead. And 3-4 people show up. There may be women, not all of them are lesbians or claim to be lesbians. There are a lot of closeted lesbians or what we call lesbian en la casa, home lesbians. And most of the old lesbians here live together in their homes. They don't do anything else. but they recognize that they're lesbians when there's a lesbian activity or an LGBTQ plus activity on the island. So my struggle here is how I want to get a group going here. And it might not be an OLOC group, but it would be an OLOC group because it would be with the same understanding, vision, and goals that OLOC has. So that right there is the struggle that I'm facing. And I don't know a huge amount of lesbians here. I do have these friends that I know from the past and that I met through my wife who lived here. She lived with me in San Francisco for 25 years, but she lives here. And when we decided to come back, my dream was to have an intentional community for all lesbians here on the island. And that's what I'm working on. And hearing about archives, damn, would I be like it would be so amazing because the stories here are so heart-wrenching and amazing, and stories of survival. When you live in a place where you've survived, Maria, the earthquakes, the pandemic, and what that has done to our community. Because we've been meeting in cars. Okay, thank you. So that's really what I wanted to present, and hoping that some way we can come up with a platform for lesbians here on the island, for not just old lesbians, for all lesbians here on the island. Thank you, and any questions?
Thank you very much, Ali. We'll have time for questions at the end. I also wanted to point out that in the chat last year at the 2019 gathering, I guess that was 2 years ago, a group of Puerto Ricanos had done a presentation, Marta and her friends at home in Puerto Rico. That was videotaped, and it is on the OLOC website. And I put the link, actually, I don't think it's on the website anymore, but I found the link and it's in the chat. So if you are interested in seeing that video of Marta and friends in Puerto Rico, that is in the chat for our presentation today. Yeah.
Just one more thing. I just wanted to do a little report on Marta because she's doing so well thanks to the donations of OLOC. She's got a new bed. She's got a new refrigerator. She's got a new roof. Her house is clean. She's got people coming in and helping her. And that's for the work of the lesbians that are working in San Sebastián in the mountains that are remote in Puerto Rico. And she's doing awesome. She's doing awesome. I'm actually going to write in the Reporter and in the E-News something about a Marta update. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ali. So I'm going to talk a little bit myself for a moment. This archives presentation was really personally important to me because I am one of those lesbians who saved everything since the moment I came out. So I have journals and books and publications and this and that and buttons and everything. So I've been trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my stuff. And I know that is, Bonnie mentioned it earlier. I think that's similar for many of us. So anyway, I have thousands of books that I've collected over the years, and a lot of independent and lesbian women's presses, mostly from the 70s to the 90s. So in trying to figure out what to do with this, I've actually started a project here in Rhode Island that I'm calling Wanderground, which is a nod to lesbian culture as imagined by Sally Miller Gerhardt. Many of you might recognize the title of that book. So I lovingly call my project Wanderground, and I've been collecting all kinds of lesbian cultural artifacts because I other than what Bonnie was saying about everybody having a copy of Ruby Fruit Jungle, I also feel like it's best for us to decentralize our collections so that they are all over the place. It's harder to hit a moving target, I feel like. So as many places as we can preserve our legacies and memories. I think that's really important. And the biggest news I got on that front was I had applied for a small grant from the Rhode Island Humanities Council to do some initial research about lesbians in Rhode Island and what our stuff is here. And I've not lived in Rhode Island only 20 years, and I don't know, I wasn't around during those earlier years. So I'm trying to find out what are the lesbian legacies of Rhode Island lesbians. So that's part of my project to start building Wanderground here in Rhode Island. So I did receive the grant, and I start my research work next week, and I'm very excited about it. So that's just a little bit of why I've been interested in this topic, and I would encourage any of you to continue doing the work that you're doing, saving all your stuff. And I also feel like I don't have kids. I don't have somebody who I can say, this is what this is about. And so that point that Deb made about who is the author of your life, I am the author of my life, and nobody knows any of even my partner of 31 years doesn't know many of my earlier life pieces. And so I have to keep my own legacy on some level. And I know that anybody coming in here would look at this and say, what is this junk, and throw it in the dumpster. And I don't particularly want that to happen. Not that my life is all that important, but I do believe I have something to add to our greater lesbian cultures and communities that I think is, and that's true for many of us. So I want to go back to that question that was asked earlier about where do we keep our stuff and so on and so forth. And Bonnie did answer a lot of the questions that were asked, but I just wanted to add a couple of things. Maybe you want to think about the archives that have specialties that you're interested in. So find an archive near you. Check their website, look and see what they take, what they don't take. I know that the Lesbian Herstory Archives in New York, and I believe the Bay Area Archive has a thing on their website that says this is what we want and this is what we don't want. So that could be really useful. You don't necessarily have to sort everything. If it's in a box, you might want to put the letters together and put the photos together and those kinds of things. But you can, sometimes the archives are willing to kind of just go through them on their own. But anything goes, photos, letters, personal papers. If you are a member of an organization and you have meeting notes from when you tried to start your own lesbian group of whatever, that would be really interesting to hold on to. And like she said, nothing mildewy or moldy, figure it this way. If you don't want to touch it, nobody else wants to touch it either. So I think that's probably a good rule to go by. The other thing that I've been thinking about a lot, and this is part of the reason why I wanted to work with Wanderground in Rhode Island, is there are a lot of archives held in universities, but they may not be generally accessible to the larger community. Unless you're doing a research project and you have to get into that archive, it's not like you can just go in and, because there's security measures and this and that. So university may or may not be the best place depending on how they keep their archives and how open they are to a community. You might also think, well, I'll just send it to the public library. Well, that's okay too, but also consider that they have circulation issues, they have space issues. And so there might be some things that if it hasn't circulated in whatever their defined period is, a year, 4 years, 10 years, it will get sold or put in the dumpster. So that's not necessarily an assurance that it will be kept for the long term. And maybe you want to donate it to your local community center, which is great too, but are they going to be open in 2, 3, 6 years? And if they don't continue to stay open, where's it going to go after that? So those are just some things to think about as you're collecting your stuff, and we hope that you do. And that was sort of the purpose for today's event. So there have been a lot of things that we've been putting in the chat. I see that everybody's been sharing resources. I'm going to put in again. We had created a PDF of all the archives and information on how to save your stuff. So that is in the PDF that I just posted in the chat. It will be up. It is actually up on the OLOC website right now, as will the video and the chat from today's event be put up on the OLOC website probably in the next week or so.